Alright, welcome everyone. In today's video, we're going to take a look at game number 3 of Karpov versus Kamsky. In this game, Karpov with white plays pawn d4. We get knight of 6, pawn c4, pawn to e6, knight f3, pawn to b6, the queen's Indian defense. Pawn g3, bishop to a6. And here's a moment where you have to decide how to defend the c4 pawn. Karpov plays pawn b3. We get bishop to b4 check, bishop to d2, and the bishop goes back to e7. The idea of this check is to misplace the bishop on d2. Bishop g2 and pawn c6, trying to establish the center pawn with d5. We get bishop c3, pawn d5, and knight to e5. This prevents black from going knight to d7 here, and I think it's a critical moment for black to find the way to proceed. What do you think black played here? And at any point during the video, by the way, feel free to pause it and play Guess the Move. As well, you're also welcome to check out my full analysis of this video, trying to analyze the game in depth prior to looking at it or making the moves. We get knight e7 by black. As soon as white jumped in, black immediately targets the knight with the f knight. Knight takes, knight takes. If you, by the way, go with the other knight to d7, the c6 pawn falls. The knight was guarding it. Get knight d7, knight takes on d7, knight takes back, and knight to d2, protecting the pawn on c4. Castles, castles, and rook b8. Kamsky has a nice idea, which is to play b5 and force white to make a decision in the center. If it was white's turn, white would play the move e4, trying to chip away at the center, and after takes, we can take with the knight or the bishop and target the pawn on c6, and as well have a space advantage in the center. So rook b8 is quite a nice move. e4, unfortunately, isn't the best in this case. It's playable, but with the bishop still here, we don't have to take this way. We can take this way and play b5. And as well, there was a game played by Yasser Seirawan in the year 1982, where I believe we get a similar story, b5, and Karpov played c5 in this game, but I think the game went like e4, and I forget if he took this way or this way, but we established, oh yeah, he took this way, takes, and Seirawan played knight to b6, if I am correct here. But actually taking is best for black. So just a little story if you like the commentator Yasser. In this game, we get rook to e1, b5, pawn to c5, pawn to e5, trying to break down white's position. Okay, if you were in this position as white, what would you play? Would you play e3? Would you play b4? Would you take it? Would you play e4 here? Pause the video and try to guess it. Okay, in this position, Karpov played takes. Now, the engine actually recommends pawn to b4 here. And after you'd assume black would go e4 and f5 launch attack, we have the move pawn to f3, trying to undermine this pawn. But still, the game is roughly level. Pawn to e5, we get takes. Knight takes c5, pawn to a3. Knight comes to e6, a great square as a blockader. And black has some pawns that are ready to roll down the board. White has these two double pawns, which can be quite a big problem for him if not treated. Karpov plays b4, trying to stall the queenside pawns. We get d4, bishop b2, c5. Karpov takes, bishop takes, and knight to e4. The bishop goes to e7. We get e3, chipping away the pawns. Pawn takes, rook takes, queen takes, rook takes, and bishop e7. Now in this position, the most obvious move is rook d7, which was played in the game. But according to the engine, knight d6 is also a very strong move here. Trading off the light squared bishop, but being able to establish a very strong pawn chain with f4, e5, and a very strong knight as well on d6. In the game, we have rook d7, and Kamsky parts with his bishop. Bishop takes knight, rook takes on e7. You could also take bishop takes e4 as fully playable, but then we have bishop c5, and the bishop is quite strong on this diagonal, defending the pawn on a7 and targeting f2. So Karpov takes on e7. We get bishop takes g2, king takes g2, and a5. White has to stop these pawns from rolling down the board, and black has some queenside advantage. He goes rook to a7, and we have rook to a8 played by Kamsky. Rook takes, rook attacks the pawn, rook to b8, and bishop c3 attacking the pawn. We get a4, rook b1, and rook to c8. The bishop moves to safety, also covers the c3 square, so there's no rook coming to c3, and we get rook c5. The pawn's protected with pawn to f4, and Kamsky plays f6, Karpov captures, and Kamsky captures back. So we have a very interesting position in the endgame. We have a 3 versus 2 on the king side and a 2 versus 1, or 1 versus 2 on the queen side. If you were white in this position, and you were in Karpov's shoes, what would you play? Take some time to analyze it if you like. Okay, in this position, Karpov plays a very nice move, rook d1. You might think the rook belongs on this b file, holding onto the pawn, but a lot of analysis that I did show that it was very difficult to actually target the pawn. And instead, Karpov finds a way to improve the rook, targeting the king and targeting the pawn at the same time. Rook to d1, king to f7, rook d7, king moves to g6. We have king to f3, rook to c4, and king to e3. The knight moves to c5, attacking the rook on d7, and the rook goes to d5. You cannot go rook rook b7 here because the knight would take, and one other consideration is rook c7. So we have a choice, rook d5 or rook c7, and I think rook c7 is very instructive. Can you find the move black would play here? Pause the video if you want to see it. It's the move knight to b3, taking advantage of the fact that the bishop is a bit weak. White would be forced to take, and we can take back, and this pawn structure is potentially a little bit weak, but fine for black. Just gonna check that with the engine. Yeah, knight to b3. Let's turn the engine on. And yeah, knight to b3, rook takes, pawn takes, and bishop to b4. And still completely level position. The king's also not able to get in to attack the pawn. You'd have to go in front of the pawn. Okay, some analysis to be done there as well. Let's turn this off. After rook d5, we get king f7. And now Karpov makes a slight error. He plays bishop to b6. It looks like completely over. I mean, if you move the knight anywhere, the pawn falls. If you give a check, we have king d4 attacking the rook and the knight. And the problem here is that the bishop did need to cover the c3 square, stopping some rook c3, rook a3 attack. So here, Kamsky finds the only move, I think, rook c3 check, and after king d4, plays rook c4 back. The pawn protects the rook, and the king has to move. You have to go back to d2. After rook c3, we have king to e2, and the knight moves to safety, and the pawn is hanging now. We get rook takes b5, rook takes a3, rook to a5. It should be noted instructively that Karpov moves the rook behind the pawn and still keeps activity, also cutting the king off. One move in my analysis I was suggesting was rook to b2, which stops the rook from getting to the second rank, but it's a little bit weaker. The pawn isn't being targeted, and the king is also able to get in the game. So rook to a5, get king g6, bishop d4, pawn to h5, and bishop to e3, pawn to f5, Rook gives a check, and in this position, both players agree to a draw. So that concludes game number 3, a peaceful ending, and I hope you enjoyed today's video, and we will take a look at game 4 in the future. Bye for now.